My husband took our son's college fund and ran off with his secretary. I was lost until my 20-year-old son said this. I still remember the day my world fell apart like it was yesterday. It was a Wednesday morning, unremarkable in every way, until it wasn't. The spring sunshine filtered through our kitchen curtains as I prepared breakfast, the same way I had for the past 23 years of marriage. Mark kissed me goodbye, his aftershave lingering in the air as he headed to work. He smiled, told me he'd be late tonight. Important client meeting, he said, and walked out the door. That was the last time I saw my husband as the man I thought I knew. I spent the day like any other, cleaning the house and preparing for my part-time job at the library. Around noon, I went to check our bank accounts online, planning to pay the monthly bills. That's when I noticed it. Our joint account was nearly empty. More alarming, Ryan's college fund, the one we'd been building for 18 years, showed a balance of 0. My hands trembled as I called Mark. No answer. I called his office. Mr. Thompson called in sick today, his receptionist told me, confusion evident in her voice. By evening, when Mark hadn't returned home and still wasn't answering his phone, panic set in. I called his friends, his brother, even the police, who gently explained that a grown man missing for less than 24 hours wasn't a priority. Ryan came home from his evening job at the local hardware store around midnight, worry etched across his young face. Mom, what's wrong? Where's Dad? I couldn't bring myself to tell him about the emptied accounts. Not yet. I don't know, honey. He didn't come home from work. The next morning, I noticed an envelope on the kitchen counter that hadn't been there before. My name was written across it in Mark's handwriting. With shaking fingers, I tore it open and unfolded the single page inside. Elena, by the time you read this, Amanda and I will be far away. I've taken the money, all of it. I know this will hurt you and Ryan, but I've spent too many years putting everyone else first. I've finally chosen happiness. Don't try to find us. It's over. Mark. Amanda, his secretary of 3 years. The pretty blonde who had brought us cookies at Christmas and asked about Ryan's college plans with seemingly genuine interest. I collapsed onto the kitchen floor, the letter crumpled in my fist. The betrayal was so complete, so calculated, that I couldn't breathe. He hadn't just abandoned me, he had stolen our son's future. When Ryan came home that afternoon, I still hadn't moved from the kitchen. Mom, Ryan's voice cracked with fear. What happened? I looked up at my son. So much like his father in appearance, yet with a heart I now realized was entirely his own. Your father's gone, Ryan. He left us. His eyes went to the letter, then back to me. What do you mean, gone? He took everything, Ryan. The money, our savings, your college fund. The words felt like glass in my throat. He ran away with his secretary. Ryan's face transformed before my eyes. The boy became a man as understanding dawned. He picked up the letter, read it once, then tore it in half. That son of a... He stopped himself, hands shaking. I can't believe he would do this. To you? To us. The days that followed blurred together in a haze of shock and logistics. Bills arrived with alarming regularity. Mortgage, utilities, credit cards I didn't know we had, apparently maxed out. Mark had been handling our finances for years. I had trusted him completely, never questioning when he said things were tight or that we needed to be careful with money. Now I understood why. We were drowning in debt. Mark hadn't just taken our current funds, he had borrowed against our future. The home we'd lived in for 15 years was mortgaged to the hilt. There were loans in both our names. Mrs. Thompson, I'm sorry to say this, but you may need to consider bankruptcy, my financial advisor said gently. And you should probably speak to a lawyer. Ryan dropped out of his classes, taking more shifts at the hardware store. I picked up extra hours at the library and found a weekend job cleaning offices. Every penny went toward keeping our heads above water, but it wasn't enough. 2 months after Mark's disappearance, I sat at our kitchen table surrounded by past due notices, trying to decide which utilities we could afford to keep on. Ryan walked in, his eyes shadowed with exhaustion from his double shift. Mom, I can defer college for a year, he said, dropping his backpack on the floor. Maybe 2. We'll figure this out. The defeat in his voice broke something in me. My beautiful, brilliant son, who had dreamed of becoming an engineer since he was 12, was watching his future slip away because of his father's selfishness. This isn't fair, Ryan. None of this is fair to you. He sat beside me, his shoulders slumped. I trusted him, Mom. I thought he was proud of me. All those talks about my future, about how education was the most important thing. His voice broke. It was all lies. I reached across the table, taking his hand in mine. At 20, his fingers were already calloused from work, his youth slipping away as he shouldered burdens that were never meant to be his. I'm so sorry, baby. I'm going to fix this somehow. The promise felt hollow even as I spoke it. I had no idea how to keep her home, let alone rebuild Ryan's college fund. We sat in silence for a long moment, the weight of our new reality pressing down on us. Then Ryan looked up, something shifting in his expression. Mom, he said slowly, Grandma left us something. I blinked at him, confused. What are you talking about? Before Grandma Margaret died, she told me something. He hesitated, then continued. She made me promise not to tell anyone, especially Dad, unless we ever really needed it. For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of something other than despair. It wasn't quite hope, not yet, but it was a change in the suffocating pattern of our lives since Mark's betrayal. Tell me everything, I whispered. What exactly did Grandma Margaret tell you? I asked, leaning forward. The kitchen light cast shadows across Ryan's face as he took a deep breath. It was during her last hospital stay, when Dad stepped out to talk to the doctors, Ryan explained. She grabbed my hand so tight it hurt, Mom. She looked scared, but determined. Ryan's eyes met mine, and I saw a flicker of the boy who used to tell me everything. Grandma said, Ryan, your father is not the man you think he is. He's just like his father, selfish to the core. My breath caught. Margaret had always been kind to me, treating me more like a daughter than a daughter-in-law, but she rarely spoke about her late husband, except to say they had a complicated marriage. She told me she'd been watching Dad for years, seeing signs I was too young to understand. Small things at first, how he'd hide purchases from you, make excuses for missing important events, always put himself first, Ryan continued. But then she found out he was stealing from her, too. What? I gasped. Mark was stealing from his own mother? Ryan nodded grimly. Grandma caught him forging her signature on checks. She confronted him, and he convinced her it was a one-time mistake. She wanted to believe him. He was her only child, but she didn't trust him after that. I recalled how Margaret had suddenly changed her financial arrangements about 5 years ago, insisting on managing everything herself despite her declining health. Mark had been irritated, calling it stubborn independence. Now I understood. She made me promise to keep what she told me secret unless there was ever a true emergency, Ryan said. She said there was a separate inheritance, one Dad knew nothing about. Something just for us. But why would she tell you and not me? I asked, not hurt, but confused. Ryan looked down. She said Dad could charm you into telling him anything. She loved you, Mom, but she knew how devoted you were to him. The truth of his words stung. I had been blindly loyal to Mark, never questioning, never doubting. Grandma said she'd hidden documents somewhere safe, where Dad would never think to look, Ryan continued. She told me, when the time comes, and I pray it never does, look where memories sleep, but never die. I frowned. That's cryptic. I know. I've been thinking about it since Dad left. I think she meant her photo albums or keepsakes, something sentimental he'd never bother with. Margaret had passed away 8 months ago. Mark had rushed through the funeral arrangements, impatient with grief rituals. He'd boxed up most of her belongings, donating some and storing the rest in our attic. Items he'd deemed worthless. Old books, photographs, handmade quilts. We need to check the attic, I said, standing so quickly my chair scraped against the floor. We raced upstairs, pulling down the attic ladder. The space was stifling, filled with dust and forgotten memories. Ryan switched on the single bulb while I located the boxes labeled Mom's Things in Mark's hasty scrawl. "What exactly are we looking for?" Ryan asked, opening the first box. "I'm not sure," I admitted. "Letters, maybe? A safe deposit key? Something that would lead us to this inheritance." We worked in concentrated silence, carefully examining photo albums, old letters, and keepsakes. Hours passed, and discouragement began to set in. Maybe Margaret's words had been the confused ramblings of an elderly woman. Maybe there was no inheritance. "Mom, look at this," Ryan called suddenly, holding up a tattered book. "Grandma used to read this to me when I was little." It was an old copy of The Secret Garden, Margaret's favorite. "She specifically gave me this book before she died," Ryan said, turning it over in his hands. "Said it had special meaning for her." Something about his words triggered a memory. Margaret, sitting by Ryan's bedside years ago, reading that very book. "Remember, Ryan," she'd said, "the most important things are often hidden away, waiting for someone who cares enough to find them." "Open it," I urged. Ryan carefully opened the cover, flipping through the yellowed pages. Nothing seemed unusual until he reached the back cover. There, taped inside, was a small key. "A key," I exclaimed. "But to what?" Ryan's eyes widened. "Mom, remember the locked box in Grandma's closet? The one Dad couldn't open, so he just shoved it in with her things." We dug deeper into the boxes, searching frantically. Finally, in the bottom of the third container, we found a small wooden box with intricate carvings, its lock intact. With trembling hands, Ryan inserted the key. It turned with a satisfying click. Inside lay a sealed envelope addressed to me, several official-looking documents, and a small, leather-bound journal. I opened the envelope first. "My dearest Elena, if you're reading this, my fears about Mark have come true. I've watched him all his life, saw the same selfishness that defined his father. I try to guide him, but some flaws run too deep. What Mark never knew is that his father, my husband, left me quite wealthy. I've kept most of it hidden, investing carefully and secretly. The enclosed documents detail properties, accounts, and investments that belong to you and Ryan now. Mark has no legal claim to any of it, as I've consulted extensively with my attorneys. The account numbers and access information are in my journal, along with the contacts who can help you claim everything. I've loved you like a daughter, Elena. You and Ryan deserve better than what Mark can give. Use this to build the life you both deserve. With all my love, Margaret." Tears streamed down my face as I looked at the documents: property deeds, stock certificates, bank statements. The value was staggering. "Mom?" Ryan's voice was barely a whisper. "How much is it?" I looked up at my son, seeing hope replace despair in his eyes. "Enough," I said, my voice strengthening. "Enough to start over. Enough to send you to college. Enough to ensure your father never hurts us again." For the first time since Mark walked out, I felt something powerful surge through me. Not just hope, but determination. Margaret had given us more than money. She'd given us a future. The next morning, armed with Margaret's journal, Ryan and I began our methodical search through all of her belongings. The journal contained cryptic notes, references to locations, and what appeared to be a personal accounting system only Margaret would understand. "Look at this," Ryan said, pointing to a recurring entry labeled Nightingale Investments. "She mentions it every few pages, but never explains what it is." I flipped through the documents we'd found in the box. Nothing here matches that name. It must be something else we haven't found yet. We expanded our search, moving beyond the attic to every corner of our house where Margaret's possessions might be. Ryan remembered that some of her furniture had been moved to our basement after she downsized to her assisted living apartment 5 years ago. "She always had hiding places," Ryan said as we descended the basement stairs. "Remember how she'd hide birthday presents in the most unexpected spots?" The basement was damp and dimly lit, filled with forgotten items from our past. Margaret's old writing desk stood against one wall, its polished wood surface covered with a thin layer of dust. Mark had wanted to sell it, calling it outdated junk, but I'd insisted on keeping it for sentimental reasons. "This desk was her pride and joy," I said, running my fingers along the ornate carvings. She told me once it belonged to her grandmother. Ryan studied it carefully. Grandma loved secret compartments. Remember how she showed me the hidden drawer in her jewelry box? Together, we examined every inch of the desk, pressing panels, pulling drawers, looking for anything unusual. After 30 minutes of searching, Ryan's fingers found a small indentation beneath the writing surface. "Mom, look at this." He pressed it, and with a soft click, a narrow drawer popped out from the side of the desk, a drawer invisible to the casual observer. Inside lay a USB drive and another sealed envelope, this one yellowed with age. The envelope contained a handwritten letter, dated 15 years earlier, and several photographs. "Elena, if you're reading this, you've discovered what I've hidden from Mark for decades." The photographs enclosed tell a story I've kept buried out of shame and regret. The man in these pictures with my husband Richard is his business partner, Samuel. What these photos reveal is that Richard was embezzling from their company, siphoning funds to secret accounts. Samuel discovered this a year before Richard's heart attack. Instead of exposing him, Samuel agreed to keep silent for a price: half of everything Richard had stolen. After Richard died, I found these photos and evidence of their scheme. I confronted Samuel, who confessed everything. Rather than go public with the scandal, I made a deal with him. I would keep their secret, but he would relinquish his claim on Richard's legitimate assets and help me invest the embezzled funds to build something honest. Over 2 decades, with Samuel's financial expertise, I have transformed Richard's ill-gotten gains into legitimate investments. The Nightingale portfolio, named for Samuel's love of birds, has grown beyond what either of us imagined possible. Samuel passed away 3 years ago, but our agreement ensured everything would come to me, and eventually to you and Ryan, never to Mark, who unfortunately inherited his father's worst qualities. The USB drive contains all documentation, account access, and legal papers securing this inheritance for you and Ryan alone. With love and hope for your future, Margaret. The photos showed 2 middle-aged men in business attire, shaking hands over documents, meeting in hotel lobbies, exchanging briefcases. Mundane images that told an extraordinary story. Ryan plugged the USB drive into his laptop. It contained hundreds of files, financial records, investment portfolios, property deeds, and legal documents. One spreadsheet, labeled Current Holdings, made my heart race. The total at the bottom was nearly $7 million. "Mom," Ryan whispered, his face pale. "Is this real?" My hands trembled as I scanned through the documents. "It appears to be. Your grandmother was sitting on a fortune all these years, and no one knew. Not even Dad," Ryan added, his voice hardening. "That's why she kept it secret." Among the files was a video recording dated just 2 months before Margaret's death. We played it, and Margaret's face filled the screen, thinner than I remembered, but her eyes still sharp with intelligence. "Elena, Ryan, if you're watching this, then the worst has happened. Mark has shown his true colors, just as I feared. I'm so sorry. I saw the signs, but hoped I was wrong." Margaret's recorded voice was firm despite her frail appearance. "The foundation I've built is solid. The lawyers listed in the accompanying documents have been paid in advance to assist you. The accounts are structured so Mark cannot touch them, even if he somehow discovers their existence. I've made sure of that." She leaned closer to the camera, her expression softening. "Elena, you are the daughter I never had. Ryan, you are the grandson who brought me such joy. Build the life you deserve. Don't let Mark's betrayal define you. Sometimes the greatest gifts come from our deepest wounds." The video ended, leaving us in stunned silence. "She knew," I finally said. "She knew what Mark might do someday." Ryan nodded, his jaw set in determination. "And she prepared for it. All those years, she was creating a safety net for us." We spent the next 2 days cataloging everything. Beyond the massive investment portfolio, there were 3 properties: a lakeside cabin in Michigan, a small apartment in Chicago, and a beachfront condo in Florida, all held in an irrevocable trust with Ryan and me as the only beneficiaries. Most shocking was a small but profitable publishing company specializing in educational children's books, Margaret's secret passion project that she had funded and built over the last decade of her life. "She always told me stories were the most powerful gift you could give a child," Ryan said, his voice thick with emotion. "I never imagined she was building a whole company around that belief." On the third day, we contacted the primary attorney listed in Margaret's files. Janet Kwan responded immediately, scheduling a video call for that afternoon. "Mrs. Thompson, Ryan," she greeted us, her professional demeanor softened by a kind smile. Margaret prepared me for this call, though she hoped it would never be necessary. "I'm sorry for the circumstances that brought you to me. How much of this story did you know?" I asked. "Everything," Janet replied. "I've managed Margaret's legal affairs for 15 years. She was meticulous in her planning, especially regarding the protection of these assets from your husband." "Is everything legal?" I asked hesitantly. Janet nodded firmly. "Absolutely. The origin of the initial funds may have been questionable, but Margaret spent decades legitimizing everything. The investments, the properties, the company, all are properly registered, taxed, and documented. Your inheritance is secure and untouchable by Mark." As we ended the call, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. Margaret hadn't just left us money, she had left us a future. "Mom," Ryan said, his eyes bright with unshed tears, "she saved us." I looked at my son, seeing the weight of betrayal beginning to lift from his young shoulders. "No," I corrected him gently. "She gave us the tools. Now, we save ourselves." The first thing I did with Margaret's inheritance was pay off our mortgage. There was something deeply satisfying about calling the bank and arranging for the full payment, hearing the surprise in the loan officer's voice. The second thing was to secure Ryan's education. "You need to go back to school," I told him firmly one evening, sliding a folder across our kitchen table. Inside was his acceptance letter to the engineering program he'd abandoned, along with confirmation of tuition payment for the full 4 years. Ryan stared at the papers, speechless. Then he looked up, his eyes swimming with tears. "Mom, are you sure? We could stretch this money, make it last longer if I keep working and just do part-time classes." I shook my head. "Your grandmother wanted this for you. I want this for you. No more compromises, no more putting your life on hold." Ryan enrolled for the upcoming semester, and for the first time since Mark's betrayal, I saw genuine excitement in my son's eyes as he pored over course catalogs and campus housing options. Meanwhile, I had my own decisions to make. Janet Kwan had arranged meetings with the management team of Margaret's publishing company, Storybook Horizons. They were a small but dedicated group, clearly passionate about their work and uncertain about their future now that Margaret was gone. "Mrs. Thompson," said Eliza Chen, the editorial director, during our first video meeting, "Margaret always spoke very highly of you, but she never indicated you'd be stepping into her role." "I don't intend to, at least not exactly as she filled it," I explained. "But I do want to understand what she built here." Over the next few weeks, I immersed myself in learning about the publishing business. What had begun as Margaret's passion project had evolved into a respected small press specializing in educational children's books that celebrated diversity and emotional intelligence. They had a modest but loyal customer base, primarily schools and libraries, and a catalog of nearly 100 titles. Margaret had plans to expand, explained Marcus, the finance director, during my visit to their small Chicago office. She wanted to launch a new imprint focused on young adult nonfiction, especially books about women in science and historical figures overlooked by traditional education. He showed me Margaret's business plan, carefully detailed with market research and 5-year projections. Seeing her vision laid out so clearly, I felt a surge of determination. "Let's do it," I said, surprising myself with my confidence. "Let's build what she imagined." With Ryan settled at college and thriving in his engineering courses, I threw myself into the publishing business. I rented a small apartment near the Chicago office, spending weekdays there and weekends at home. The work was challenging and entirely unfamiliar, but exhilarating in ways my library job had never been. 6 months later, we launched Margaret's Dream, the new young adult imprint named in her honor. Our first title, A biography of a pioneering female mathematician received glowing reviews and strong initial sales. I found myself giving interviews to industry publications, speaking at educational conferences, and building relationships with authors and illustrators. Ryan came home for spring break to find me surrounded by manuscript submissions in what had once been our formal dining room, now converted to a home office. "Mom," he said, leaning against the doorframe with a grin. "You're glowing. I've never seen you like this." I looked up from the manuscript I was reviewing. Like what? Alive. Powerful. He came in and perched on the edge of my desk. "It's like you've discovered a whole new version of yourself." His words struck me deeply. He was right. The devastated woman Mark had abandoned was fading away, replaced by someone stronger and more confident than I'd ever been during my marriage. Ryan was changing too. He'd always been serious and studious, but now there was a new intensity to his focus. He'd thrown himself into his engineering program with fierce determination, earning top marks and catching the attention of his professors. My engineering professor asked me to join his research team. Ryan told me over dinner that night. He's doing cutting-edge work on sustainable energy systems. "That's wonderful. Are you going to do it?" Ryan nodded, his expression resolute. "I want to build something that matters, something lasting. After what Dad did, just destroying things for his own selfish reasons, I need to create something good." I reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "You're nothing like him, you know. You never were." As the months passed, our new life took shape. The publishing company flourished under the expanded vision, with revenues growing steadily. I found I had a talent for spotting promising manuscripts and nurturing new authors, skills I'd never had the opportunity to discover during my years as Mark's wife. Word of our changed circumstances began to spread through our small community. Friends who had awkwardly avoided me after Mark's departure now reached out, expressing admiration for how we'd landed on our feet. A few admitted they'd pitted us, certain we were headed for financial ruin. I bumped into Mrs. Carson at the grocery store. I told Ryan during one of our weekend phone calls. "You should have seen her face when I mentioned my business trip to New York next week for the publishing conference." Ryan laughed. "Did you tell her about the Florida condo? That would have really shocked her." I didn't elaborate on our financial situation to curious neighbors, but I no longer felt the need to hide my success either. There was a certain satisfaction in being seen not as poor Elena, abandoned by her husband, but as Elena Thompson, who rebuilt her life and is doing better than ever. The real triumph, though, was watching Ryan flourish. By the end of his first year back at college, he had secured a prestigious summer internship with an engineering firm. His professor spoke of his potential in glowing terms, predicting a bright future. "I never would have had these opportunities if Dad hadn't left," Ryan admitted during a rare reflective moment. As horrible as it was, it forced us to find strength we didn't know we had. I considered his words carefully. "Sometimes the worst betrayals lead us to unexpected gifts," I said finally. "Your grandmother knew that. She turned her husband's dishonesty into a legacy that saved us both." What neither of us anticipated was how quickly that legacy would be tested, or how soon Mark would reappear in our lives, bringing with him a final reckoning neither of us was prepared for. 18 months after Mark vanished with our money and his secretary, I was hosting a small dinner party at our home, now fully renovated and redecorated. Ryan was home for the weekend from his junior year of college, and I had invited Janet Kwan along with several key members of the publishing team to celebrate our latest bestseller. The doorbell rang as I was arranging appetizers. Assuming it was Janet arriving early, I wiped my hands and hurried to answer. Instead, I found myself face to face with Mark. The shock nearly knocked the wind from my lungs. He looked terrible, gaunt, with dark circles under his eyes and clothes that hung loosely on his frame. The confident, polished man who had walked out of our home was gone, replaced by someone haggard and desperate. "Elena," he said, his voice cracking. "Can I come in?" Behind me, I heard Ryan's sharp intake of breath as he entered the foyer. "Dad." Mark's eyes darted to our son, widening slightly at the sight of Ryan in his university sweatshirt, looking healthy and successful. "Ryan," he said, attempting a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You look good, son." I found my voice. "What are you doing here, Mark?" He swallowed hard. I need to talk to you. Both of you." Against my better judgment, I let him in, leading him to the living room, recently remodeled with elegant furnishings that had replaced the dated decor he'd always refused to update. Mark looked around, taking in the obvious signs of prosperity with poorly concealed surprise. "You've done well," he said carefully. "The place looks expensive. Why are you here?" Ryan demanded, standing with his arms crossed, making no move to embrace his father. Mark sank onto the edge of the sofa. "Amanda left me," he admitted, 6 months ago. Took what was left of the money and disappeared with her personal trainer. I felt a bitter laugh rise in my throat, but suppressed it. "And this concerns us how?" "I'm in trouble, Elena. Serious trouble." Mark ran a hand through his thinning hair. "I'm not just broke. I'm in debt. Bad debt. To people you don't want to owe money to." Ryan's posture stiffened. "So, you thought you'd come back and see what else you could take from us?" Mark flinched. "It's not like that. I made mistakes. Terrible mistakes. I invested in some ventures that turned out to be scams. Then I borrowed to try to recover the losses and..." He trailed off, his expression desperate. "And now you need money." I finished for him. "I need help," he corrected, though we all knew it was the same thing. "I could lose everything. Like we almost did." Ryan cut in, his voice ice cold. "Like when you stole my college fund and left us drowning in debt." Mark had the decency to look ashamed. "I know what I did was unforgivable. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm just asking for help. For mercy." I studied the man I had once loved, searching for any trace of the person I'd believed him to be. "Exactly what kind of help are you expecting, Mark?" "I heard rumors," he said slowly. "About you too. About money. Someone said you're running Margaret's old publishing company now, that it's doing well." So there it was. He'd caught wind of our changed circumstances and had come sniffing around for a share. "Your mother never approved of me," Mark continued, a petulant note entering his voice. "But whatever she left, surely some of it should rightfully come to me. I was her son." "Rightfully?" Ryan's laugh was harsh. "You're talking about what's rightful? After what you did?" Mark's eyes narrowed slightly. "She was my mother. Whatever she had belongs to us," I stated firmly. "Every penny, every property, every share of the company. Margaret left it all to Ryan and me, with explicit instructions that you were to receive nothing." "That can't be legal," Mark protested. "I'm her son. I have rights." "Actually, you don't," came a new voice from the doorway. Janet Kwan stood there, elegant in a tailored suit, her expression coolly professional. Margaret's estate planning was meticulous and entirely legal. She created an irrevocable trust years ago, with Ryan and Elena as the sole beneficiaries. Mark stared at her. "Who are you?" "Janet Kwan, lead counsel for Thompson Publishing and executor of Margaret Thompson's estate." She stepped fully into the room, extending a business card that Mark didn't take. "I can assure you, every legal avenue you might consider has been anticipated and closed." Mark's face flushed with anger. "So, she wrote me out completely? Her own son?" "She protected her assets from you," Janet corrected. "Based on what eventually happened, it seems she was right to do so." Mark turned back to me, his expression shifting from anger to pleading. "Elena, please. Whatever she left you, it must be substantial. I don't need much, just enough to get back on my feet. For old time's sake." I looked at this man who had shared my bed for 23 years, who had fathered my child, who had promised to love and protect me, and who had betrayed every one of those promises. "Old time sake?" I repeated softly. "You mean like when you emptied our accounts? Or when you left me with a mountain of debt you'd hidden from me for years? Those old times." "I made mistakes," he insisted, desperation edging his voice. "But I'm still Ryan's father. Doesn't that count for something?" Ryan stepped forward. "It might have if you'd actually been a father and not just someone playing the role when it suited you." Mark's desperation turned to anger. "This is ridiculous. That money should be mine too. I was married to you when my mother died. I have rights. No, Mark, you don't, I said firmly. Not anymore. Not to this money, not to this house, and not to our lives. You can't just shut me out, Mark shouted, rising to his feet. I'll contest the will. I'll sue. I'll tell everyone how you manipulated my mother against me. Janet stepped forward. Mr. Thompson, I strongly advise against making threats or false accusations. Should you pursue legal action, we are prepared to countersue for the funds you embezzled from the joint accounts and your son's college fund. Mark's face paled. Embezzled? That's absurd. That money was mine too. Not Ryan's college fund, Janet replied smoothly. That was legally designated for educational purposes, with both parents as trustees, not owners. Your removal of those funds constituted a breach of fiduciary duty. Mark looked from Janet to me, then to Ryan, realizing he was cornered. So that's it? You've got everything and I get nothing? After all we shared. I stood up, suddenly tired of his presence in my home. You made your choice, Mark. You chose Amanda and the money over us. Now you have neither. That's not our problem. Get out, Dad, Ryan said quietly. Don't come back. Mark stared at his son, perhaps finally understanding the magnitude of what he had lost. Then, without another word, he turned and walked out of our home for the second and final time. As the door closed behind him, I felt a strange sense of closure. Mark had taken everything from us once, believing he was leaving us with nothing. But in doing so, he had inadvertently led us to discover Margaret's gift, not just the inheritance, but the strength we never knew we possessed. The morning after Mark's unwelcome visit, I awoke feeling strangely light, as though a shadow I hadn't realized was still lurking had finally been banished. Ryan was already up, sitting at the kitchen island with a cup of coffee, his expression thoughtful. You okay? I asked, pouring myself a cup. He nodded slowly. Better than okay, actually. Seeing Dad like that, desperate, pathetic, it was like the final piece of something clicked into place for me. I understood exactly what he meant. For months after Mark left, I'd imagined him living a glamorous new life with Amanda, spending our money on luxuries while we struggled. The reality, that he had crashed and burned spectacularly, brought not joy, but a quiet sense of justice. Janet called later that morning with news. Mark made some inquiries with a lawyer about contesting Margaret's will, she informed me. The attorney contacted me as a professional courtesy. My stomach tightened. Can he cause problems? None whatsoever, Janet assured me. I explained the situation fully. The lawyer has declined to represent him. I also took the liberty of sending Mark formal documentation of potential criminal charges relating to the college fund, should he pursue this further. True to Janet's prediction, we heard nothing more from Mark about legal challenges. What we did hear, through the grapevine of mutual acquaintances, was that his situation continued to deteriorate. He had been evicted from his apartment, was working at a car rental agency, and had taken to telling elaborate tales about being the victim of financial fraud. He's telling people that Amanda and some investment broker conspired to steal his money. Our former neighbor, Mrs. Lambert, told me when we bumped into each other at the supermarket. Poor Mark, she added, though her tone suggested she didn't believe his story for a moment. I didn't bother correcting the narrative. The truth was already out there, making its way through our social circles. Mark had made his bed. Now he was lying in it. 3 weeks after Mark's appearance, Ryan and I flew to Chicago for an important meeting at the publishing company. We were finalizing the acquisition of a small educational app developer whose technology would allow us to expand Margaret's vision into digital learning. Your grandmother would be so proud, Eliza Chen told Ryan as we toured the developer's offices. She always said education needed to evolve with technology, not fight against it. Ryan, who had become increasingly involved in the business despite his engineering focus, nodded thoughtfully. I've been thinking about developing a specialized engineering curriculum for middle schoolers, something that makes the concepts accessible and exciting. That's exactly the kind of thinking we need, I said, watching my son with pride. The betrayal that might have broken him had instead forged him into something stronger. a young man with vision and purpose. On our final evening in Chicago, we had dinner at Margaret's favorite restaurant, a small Italian place tucked away on a quiet street. As we finished our meal, Ryan reached into his bag and pulled out a small, wrapped package. "I've been waiting for the right moment to give you this," he said, sliding it across the table. Inside was a delicate silver pendant on a chain. Looking closer, I saw it was engraved with a tiny garden key. "Like from The Secret Garden?" I said softly, recognizing Margaret's favorite symbol. Ryan nodded. "I had it made from some of Grandma's silver. I thought, well, it represents what she gave us. Not just the material things, but the key to our future." Tears welled in my eyes as I fastened it around my neck. "It's perfect." Later that night, standing on the balcony of our hotel room overlooking the city lights, I thought about the journey of the past 2 years. From devastation to resurrection. From betrayal to triumph. "Mom," Ryan joined me, leaning against the railing. "I have something to tell you." His serious tone made me turn to face him. "What is it?" I saw Dad again, the day after he came to the house. He was waiting outside my engineering building when I got back to campus. I stiffened. "You didn't tell me." I needed to handle it myself. Ryan's jaw tightened at the memory. He tried a different approach, told me he was proud of me, that he always knew I'd succeed. Said he wanted to reconnect and be part of my life again. "What did you say?" A small, sad smile crossed Ryan's face. I told him that fathers aren't defined by biology, but by their actions. That he'd made his choice and I'd made mine. "That must have been hard," I said gently. "Easier than I expected, actually." Ryan's eyes met mine, clear and certain. The man standing there begging for money wasn't my father, not the one I thought I had. That person never existed except in my imagination. I squeezed his hand, recognizing the wisdom in his words. The Mark we had loved had been largely a creation of our own hopes and dreams, a mirage that had evaporated when tested. 6 months later, on a crisp autumn day, we received word that Mark had left town, reportedly heading west to pursue new opportunities. The news caused barely a ripple in our lives. We were too busy building something new. The publishing company continued to thrive, expanding into new markets and winning industry awards. Ryan graduated with honors, then surprised everyone by deciding to pursue a dual career, engineering during the week and serving on our company's educational board on weekends, bringing fresh, innovative perspectives to both fields. As for me, I found joy in unexpected places, in mentoring new authors, in traveling to book fairs and educational conferences, in the quiet evenings in my garden, and in the knowledge that I had survived the worst betrayal and emerged stronger. On the 5th anniversary of Mark's desertion, a date I once thought would forever be marked by pain, I hosted a celebration at our home. Friends, colleagues, authors, and Ryan's engineering mentors gathered to mark the official launch of our new educational foundation, dedicated to providing college scholarships for underprivileged students. Standing at the podium in our backyard to announce the foundation's first recipients, I touched the garden key pendant that never left my neck. Sometimes, I told the assembled guests, what seems like an ending is actually a beginning. What feels like a locked door is just waiting for the right key. I looked out at the faces before me, especially at Ryan, standing tall and proud, and knew with absolute certainty that Margaret had given us the greatest gift of all, not just financial security, but the chance to transform betrayal into blessing and pain into purpose. Mark had taken everything once, but in losing what we thought we needed, we had found what we truly deserved.